Welcome to the 30th Pearson Centre webinar on the broad theme of COVID and beyond, and a conversation with our very special guest, Annamie Paul. My name is Francesca Iacorto, and I'm an advisory board member at the Pearson Centre. I'm also the Senior Director of Public Affairs at the National Airlines Council of Canada. As many of you will know, the Pearson Centre is a progressive think tank that addresses the big economic and social challenges of the day. In that context, I am pleased to welcome you to the webinar series on the big issues facing our society in the months and years ahead. Our ongoing project is called COVID and Beyond, recognizing that we have a lot of issues to address as we plan for the recovery and rebuilding that will be slow and long. This is also an important time to think big and reimagine Canada. Today, we are delighted to have the new leader of the Green Party of Canada, again, Annamie Paul. Welcome. Ms. Paul was elected leader of the Green Party on October 3rd and immediately sought a seat in the by-election of Toronto Centre, which took place just earlier this week. So we are absolutely delighted that you could be with us so soon. Annamie Paul has a master's in public administration from Princeton University and a law degree from the University of Ottawa. She has been an advisor at the International Criminal Court, a political officer at the Canadian Mission at the European Union, and is founder of the Canadian Centre for Political Leadership. Very briefly on the format, I want to tell you that the panel discussion will last about 30 minutes and then be followed by a Q&A period with you, the audience, before we end promptly at 3:45 Eastern Time. Please use the question box on your screen and we will get to as many questions as we can. However, before we start our session, I want to acknowledge two of our volunteers for their work in developing the questions for today. They are Sharon Fernandez and board member Dr. Karen Mock, who wanted to participate in this discussion, but was unable to be here because of our schedule change. Let me start with the first question. In your introduction, I talked about your experience at Princeton in Europe and in community activism in Canada. That was a very interesting path, and can you tell us how that path has prepared you to be leader of a national party?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm really pleased to be here with all of you today. In terms of that question, you know, people in politics, and I'm very new. I'm a brand new politician. This is my first official political role. We bring our professional experience and our education, as you know, the things that you mentioned, but also our lived experience. And as someone who, you know, had some exposure very young to politics in a nonpartisan way, for me it was really important to have a full life and have lived in different places and worked in different environments before coming into politics. And so for me, having lived abroad for a number of years brings a really great comparative perspective at a time that I think that is really necessary. Having grown up in an urban environment, but with you know, from the child of parents who grew up in very small rural communities, gives me another perspective that I think is very important as well. You know, all of those things come together to help me, I hope, be a useful contributor to the kind of public policy discussions that we're having at the moment.
Definitely. You're off to a wonderful start. And I guess on that note, I will turn it over to Andrew to continue the rest of the discussion with you.
Thank you, Francesca, and thank you, Annamie Paul, as well for joining us here today. There are so many issues we want to talk to you about. So what I'll try and do is divide into two batches and first talk about some of the big issues within Canada, and then I want to go bigger and talk about some of the global issues that I think you have a really good understanding of, and I'd like to have you share your thoughts on them. So in terms of Canada, we're talking now about some major developments in public policy. You and your party have talked extensively about universal basic income. I think you've used the term livable basic income, national child care, national standards for seniors care, and of course climate change. Give us your thoughts on whether we can be dealing with those big issues at this particular time when we're also trying to cope with COVID.
Absolutely, and I don't think that there really is any other choice You know, we knew before, but we've seen very clearly during the pandemic. You know, take any of those issues. If we're talking about guaranteed livable income, it's exactly what we would have needed to prevent so many people being thrown immediately into a financial crisis the moment that the pandemic hit. And we brought in something that has elements, let's say, of what a guaranteed livable income might look like. And we see that it was absolutely essential. If we look at childcare, you know, we talk about the recession that we're experiencing now as a she session, or particularly touching women. And a lot of that has to do with childcare and the lack of it. And so, you know, everything is interconnected. And this is a time where we've really seen that. And I believe people in Canada are understanding that. So you need a full social safety net, a fully complete one. And this is really the time for us to start that planning and those conversations.
And on long-term care, what are your thoughts? How should the federal government get involved?
Yep, this is a big one. I talked about this a lot during the leadership race. You know, there's a personal element to me because my father passed away in long-term care during the pandemic. But, you know, more generally speaking, I was already, and I think every person in Canada has just been horrified at the scandalous deaths of people in long-term care, not just from infections, but even more from just the lack of adequate care. And so I've been talking, and even before me, the Green Party for a long time has been talking about the need to have a very stringent national standards. In my personal case, I don't yet have the you know, the okay from the rest of our membership, but I would like to see long-term care brought in under the Canada Health Act. And certainly there needs to be an urgent plan put in place because we're in the second wave of the pandemic. There are going to be other waves before we're through this. And we simply do not have the system in place that we need to protect people in long-term care.
Well, indeed, it has been shocking for all of us. And with some of these issues, I think what we're seeing is these have been underlying problems that have been kind of swept under the rug. And they're not new problems, but they're just laid bare a lot more.
Correct, yeah.
What are your thoughts on climate change, the top issues that we should be dealing with in that area?
Well, you know, we don't know exactly when it's going to happen, but we do know that we are going to eventually, I have every confidence that we will eventually exit the emergency stage of this pandemic. And when we get into the post-recovery period, the recovery period, not the post-recovery, but the recovery period, we are going to be spending a lot of money. You know, we heard the Minister of Finance talk about that yesterday. We're going to need a big stimulus to get our economy going. And I want to see that money going towards accelerating our transition towards a climate neutral economy. Because, you know, the climate emergency is real, it is existential, it hasn't taken a pause. We still don't have the targets that we need. We still don't have the plan that we need. And so perhaps the silver lining out of all of this tragedy is that we are going to have the money that we're going to need in order to truly do a quantum leap forward in our move towards a carbon neutral economy.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Next week on November the 6th, we've got a webinar on green infrastructure. So let me ask you if you have a question for the people. We'll have leaders of business and labor and government in that webinar. What will be the question you'd want to be asking them in terms of infrastructure? What should we be doing for green infrastructure?
Well, my first question would be, why wasn't I invited? And I'd be happy to attend.
Let's talk after.
I actually just, I think about a week or two ago, I wrote a piece that's in the Hill Times exactly just about infrastructure.
Right.
And so the infrastructure that would support a green economy. And so, you know, the things that we want to see is a coast to coast to coast national electricity grid run off of completely renewable energies. And that's something that we absolutely can do. We want to see significant investments in clean tech and the infrastructure to support clean technology, an area that we expect will generate $3 trillion globally by 2030. You know, we want to see a coast to coast to coast charging station grid. broadband service, because of course that also helps to support the green economy, and there are many areas in the country that are underserved. It's all there in my piece, but that's the infrastructure that we need to support the green economy.
Okay, I want to pull back and go big global and talk about some of the things that are happening worldwide and that are happening in Canada as well. Let me start with the issue of income inequality. There's growing income inequality. There has been significantly growing in income inequality in the last few decades, which has gotten a lot more severe over the period of this pandemic, strangely enough. What are your thoughts about that? Has capitalism failed?
Well, in more ways than one, we've seen the limits of capitalism. We live in a world, we live on a planet with finite resources, where the idea of limitless economic growth and indefinite economic growth simply isn't realistic, whether it's from every perspective, but certainly in a world of finite resources. And we've also seen the ways that capitalism, as it's currently practiced, has left us exposed and left people without the protections that they should have. And so, government has always had an important role to play in regulating and reining back the worst excesses of the market. And again, we've seen why that's so important. And so going forward, we hope that these lessons, every time we learn them, we hope that we do better the next time, and we have to do better the next time. We need better regulation, we need better oversight, we need a sustainable green economy that respects the finite resources of our planet.
Do you see Canada taking a role in terms of limiting what some of the major corporations are able to make in terms of their income?
I'm focusing more at the moment on the way that government can, as I said, limit the excesses of the capitalist and the market system, which has not, as you said, has been deepening and exacerbating inequalities. And that should be a concern to everyone, because societies with profound inequality and growing inequality are very fragile. And those democracies are fragile, and so we don't want to see that here or anywhere else in the world. And so that is the role that government has to play. Government has to rein in the excesses. They have to be thinking about the whole, and that's really, in terms of the Green Party, that's what we have been talking about for a very, very long time.
Okay, and in terms of minimum wage, we saw a bit of understanding at the beginning of the pandemic, where some of the supermarkets, for example, were increasing the minimum wage they were providing to their staff by $2 an hour. They did that for about 3 months and then took it back. But as we know, the so-called heroes, all the frontline workers, whether it's the people in long-term care, or whether it's people who work in our grocery stores to make sure we got our food, they're all paid very, very low. Do you see a need for a national minimum wage, or for us to be addressing that issue?
Well, we certainly, we certainly want to see a livable wage, both provincially and federally. That's really what we have to be working towards. And then in addition to that, we want to see a guaranteed livable income. When you see these boosts, these bump ups, these top ups that came at the beginning of the pandemic and then were clawed back, it was very clear that they were necessary. And we've seen all sorts of areas of our labor market where there is a discrepancy or an asymmetry between the value of the work, as we now understand it to be, and the compensation. And so this again is the time, if we have true political leadership, where we should be looking at all of that and talking about, again, what is an actual livable wage? And what do we need to do in order to make sure that no one falls through the cracks? There's no question to me that part of the answer is a guaranteed livable income.
Yeah, okay. I want to move along to a couple of other subjects, and I'm sorry if we're not giving you enough time to to explore each issue, but I want to talk a little bit about multilateralism.
Okay.
Important issue for us at the Pearson Centre. I think Lester Pearson was perhaps the foremost multilateralist in Canada. And I know that you've had experience working in multilateral organizations in Europe. Yet you look around the world and that whole idea of countries working together seems to be coming apart. You've got this growing tendency of people electing or coming to office of essentially strong men who really want to just be, you know, at each other's throats. So whether it's Trump or Putin or Xi or Bolsonaro or Erdogan, there's this trend across the world of people who are less interested in working together and more interested in beating the drums of nationalism within their country. What do you think what's the future of multilateralism?
Well, if we're going to tackle the great challenges of our time, it has to be strong. It has to be a robust future. And this is something that Canada can absolutely play a role in. You mentioned Pearson. It's something in terms of multilateralism and supporting those institutions. It's something that Canada historically has done very well. It's something we have not done very well recently. And it's a role that we can reclaim. Because whether it's the pandemic or the climate emergency or the future of work, these are all challenges that extend beyond our borders and are going to require intense degrees of cooperation between governments around the world, between states around the world, and that's where multilateral institutions come into play. In terms of Canada, we also should keep in mind that given our relative size and influence globally, we have always been most impactful, most effective when we've been able to create let's say a coalition or build a coalition around ideas at the multilateral level. And so this time that those institutions are under siege and are being attacked in a very self-interested way by various heads of state around the world, this is exactly the time that Canada can be a strong counterweight to that by being very explicit about the need for those institutions, investing in them properly, and again, working with other like-minded states to reinforce those institutions.
Okay, can you share with us a little bit of your experience since you worked at the Canadian mission to the European Union, where there's a number of countries working together? What was your observation about how countries work together? You would have been seeing it up very close. Is there a natural tendency for them to be competitive or not work together, or is there a natural tendency to work together?
Well, I would say the most extraordinary thing at the moment, my experience was one, of course, there were moments of disagreement, there were moments of cooperation. It's a grand experiment and a real challenge, but it's quite extraordinary what they've been able to accomplish. And when I look at this particular moment and where the innovation is coming from, in terms of a green recovery, in terms of how to tackle the pandemic. It's coming out of the European Union. And I say to myself that if all of those member states with their different languages and cultures and traditions and histories can come together so quickly to agree on a plan of action for a green recovery, for instance, then we must be able to do it across the provinces and the federal government here in Canada, where we have so much in common. And so I look to them as a model of how cooperation can happen and how much more impactful states are when they work together. And in our case, how much more impactful we could be if we had a greater degree of intergovernmental cooperation.
Okay, so of all the issues that we could be playing a role internationally, what would you think we should lead with?
Well, you already touched on one, which is reinforcing our multilateral institutions at a time when they're under attack. Yeah. The other one, of course, that we have to continue to mention is because it is an existential crisis and we have not shown leadership on this issue, but we can and we should, is the climate emergency. For a country that is so heavily based on, our economy is so heavily based on resource extraction and fossil fuel extraction, for us to choose to actively show leadership by beginning our transition away from those industries and towards sustainable, the green, let's say green sectors, that would be a tremendous contribution internationally. And if we were to add things, innovative ideas like introducing carbon border adjustments, for instance, which allow us to protect our businesses, but while at the same time, let's say incentivizing polluting countries to get their act together, that's what real leadership looks like. And so these are some real opportunities that we have. We still have to show true leadership internationally.
Yeah, okay. I want to move you to one other big global issue, and that's what I'll call diversity, inclusion, and racism. It seems to me a good part of the last century, well, the latter half of the last century, we were coming to a place where we thought we were getting better at living together. There was more movement of peoples, and there was a sense of peoples of different backgrounds being able to live together, and that it was a good idea. A lot of that seems to be coming apart in the last few years. I don't know if you'd agree with that kind of thought, but why do you think this is all coming apart, where racism is becoming more prominent and in some ways acceptable? There's growing hate movements. What do you see happening in this whole field in Canada and internationally?
Yeah, well, I'm a policy analyst by training, and so without the data, I hesitate to, even if I have an intuition, I hesitate to make any firm pronouncements. And then we do know that certain things that people feel are headed in one direction are actually headed in the other. So, for instance, people feel like we are living through a greater era of deadly conflict, for instance, when in fact we have long been in a decline. When we compare historical rates of deadly conflict around the world. So without knowing for certain that is increasing, I will at least say that there is no question that the awareness of racism, for instance, awareness of populism and is increasing. And that is a good thing, because you need to be aware of a problem if you're going to tackle it. And I have personally found that silence emboldens hate. You touched on one of the reasons that we may be sensing that there is an increase lately, which is inequality. Rising inequality has always been the fertile playground for rising populism. And so if we want to protect our societies, if we want to reinforce our social cohesion, then we really need to be looking at all the ways that we can complete our social safety nets, the ways that we can be moving towards a more equal society and eliminating the things that have been exacerbating inequality.
And what's your sense of, okay, so income inequality is one of the issues within Canada. Do you think there's a growing tolerance for intolerance in Canada?
Social media has really changed a lot. It's hard to know. I mean, I'm sure some very energetic doctoral student somewhere is studying this as we speak. So it's hard to know whether this was a pre-existing condition and it has simply become more obvious because there are more outlets that are available for it, whether it's the 24-hour news cycle or social media. But I can say that, again, and part of this is my own experience, my own brief experience in politics, that people are, as you said, they're much more comfortable than I thought they would be in expressing hateful views in public fora. And that is something that should concern us all. And so we do need to understand it, and we need to address the underlying issues, whether it's a lack of education, whether it's a lack of inclusion, whether it's a lack of equality. We need to first understand it so that we can tackle it.
Okay, I want to move to some of the questions coming in. We've got a number coming in, so I'll pose these to you, and they're going to be all over the place, so be ready.
Great.
That was a little, we started off with a little plan, now we're going to go to all sorts of interesting issues. So the first one is, how does the Green Party differ from the NDP? If similar policies, why not just join the NDP?
Well, we try, the Green Party, particularly in this moment, we will always try very hard to find the areas of agreement and commonality between ourselves and the other parties. I really believe that that's what people in Canada expect. And if we really do care about helping people get through this pandemic the best they can, it is the time for cross-partisan collaboration and cooperation. And so that is always our starting point. That being said, there are some very important differences. When I came back to Canada, I looked at, the Liberals and the NDP and the Greens in terms of deciding which one I wanted to join. And, I couldn't join any party that wasn't serious about the climate emergency. The Green Party is the only party that has targets that correspond to the science and a plan to get there. I also didn't want to be part of a party where all of the power was concentrated in the leader's office. The Green Party, we work by consensus and we're very grassroots. And then finally, we have some very fundamental differences on social policies, which I hope will change over time. But when I ran in 2019 and I talked about a guaranteed livable income and I talked about a safe supply in order to prevent opioid deaths, for instance, or universal post-secondary education, I was out there on my own. And so the Green Party injects those very innovative, bold ideas first, and we welcome the other parties jumping on, but someone has to be the first one out the gate with those ideas.
Your point about working together is really interesting, because I find quite frustrating in this period when there's a minority government that the media constantly ask the other parties, will you stand up to the government, or will you compromise and bend over kind of stuff, rather than saying, will you find a way to work with the government and make this parliament work?
Yeah, they do. And it does make things hard, because when it becomes a binary choice like that, you either support the government or you're not supporting the government, it becomes very hard to have any nuance. And with parties and the partisan situation, it puts additional pressure on all of us to think about other things. And when the only thing that we should be thinking about is what is the best decision we can take in the interests of people in Canada. And so, we're going to continue. We always try to explain our reasoning. Lately, we haven't been really voting for or against any party. We've been very disappointed to see this steady decline back into partisan politics in Parliament. And so sometimes we're going to lose out. People are still going to paint us with the brush of one party or the other based on how we decide. But, we're still going to try to make the best decisions we can on behalf of people.
Okay, next question. Will a guaranteed basic income help solve economic disparities?
Yes. Yes, it will. And we call it a guaranteed livable income because, we're not looking for a subsistence living here. We're looking for an income that allows people to truly plan, to truly invest in themselves. And this is something that we were talking about even prior to the pandemic, because we understood that, the changing nature of work means that we can expect that there will likely be massive displacement of our existing workforce. And some people are going to be able to immediately transition into new jobs. Some people will need to be retrained. Some people will not be able to re-enter the workforce. And so we need to have a plan for all of those people. And that's where the guaranteed livable income comes in. It allows everyone to live in dignity. It allows them to do that planning without panic. And, it pays for itself in terms of the social dividends that it yields.
Okay, you've touched on the next question a bit before, and I'll ask you to expand a bit. What does a true green recovery mean to the Green Party post-pandemic? And what I'll add to that is, could you also talk about your thoughts about public transit?
Okay, well, they certainly are complementary. I mean, a green recovery, it looks to us like and this will always be a work in process, yes. We always want to be moving towards a more just and sustainable and equitable society. And that includes completing our social safety net, and it includes a carbon neutral economy, both of which are essential elements to a healthy country, a healthy planet, a healthy democracy. And so we want to see a climate neutral, or sometimes it's called carbon neutral or net zero economy. We want to see our buildings retrofitted. We want to make sure that all of the universal programs that would have protected us better during this period are in place. We want to see true reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. We need climate justice and social justice. The two really go hand in hand. I could say so much more, but I know time is limited.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit more about reconciliation?
Oh, sorry, public transportation, you said. And of course, public transportation is a part of that. Though I would say, Andrew, that I've been talking with some mayors today here in Ontario, and we really have to consider that we're going to need to do a massive public re-education rather about public transportation. They're reporting that ridership is down between 50 and 70%. Yeah. And some of that ridership will come back naturally, but some of it won't. Some of it won't come back because a lot of people are going to be working from home for good. And some of it won't come back because people are really worried about riding public transportation in a pandemic. And so that is a new issue, and we're going to need some new solutions to how we deal with that, because we do need to continue moving toward public transportation across the country.
Okay, and on reconciliation, can you talk a little bit more about your thoughts on where the federal government needs to go?
Well, it's certainly not headed in the right direction now, and that's disappointing to see. When we look at the situation out on the East Coast in Nova Scotia, for instance, with the lobster fisheries, the most recent thing that I had read is that a facilitator had been appointed to facilitate between the commercial fishers and the Mi'kmaq. Now, the Mi'kmaq are a nation. We're talking about nations, and what they expect, and rightly so, are nation-to-nation conversations. And so we first need to acknowledge that what the gold standard, the default has to be our nation-to-nation conversations. We need to respect the recommendations and calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report. We also need to, we need to not be taking Indigenous children to court and continuing to appeal the decisions to provide them with compensation. And we need to dismantle systemic racism within our institutions. All of these are elements of reconciliation, and we're really behind schedule with every single one of them.
Okay, can I ask you, the next question is about defunding about the police. Do you agree with defunding the police? And what do you see was the role of the RCMP in reforming policing?
So there are different levels of policing services. One thing that we've seen across the board over the last number of years is a massive increase in funding for police services. It has the funding being allocated to police services has far outstripped our funding to community and social services across the country. And so there are some municipalities that have of their own volition in the last little while either passed motions to reduce funding or they're in the process of debating those motions. I believe that police services should be restricted to police services and not social services. And that money and those services should be reallocated to those who are much better able to provide them. And where we don't have the services we need, because we do need mental health rapid response services, that money can go towards that. We need much better data. There is very little data being collected about policing in this country. And that applies to the RCMP as well as to municipal and provincial policing services. And so, we recognize that there is systemic racism in policing, that we need a fundamental reform of the system. And there's information on my website if anyone wants to take a look at the plan that we proposed during the leadership race.
Okay, what are your thoughts about the RCMP? Should it be taking a leadership role nationally in terms of reforming policing? And do you think it's capable of doing that?
Well, the RCMP is in need of fundamental reform. I'm sure it was difficult for me to hear, and I'm sure painful to many others who come from communities that have been disproportionately impacted by systemic racism in policing, whether that's in terms of deadly police use of force, rates of incarceration, rates of arrest, etc. It's very hard to hear the struggles of the leadership to even acknowledge that the problem exists. And so, we need first leadership that acknowledges that it exists, and that means that we need more leadership coming from the Indigenous community, from Black communities, because again, as I said, we are the most impacted by the failures of the system. And yes, we always have to. We expect the RCMP to show leadership on this issue. We expect the federal government to insist that they show leadership on these issues.
Okay, because it seems to me there's both a role for the RCMP to be reforming itself, but as a national police force to be working with the, I guess there's 3 provincial police forces we have and several municipal ones. They have done work in this area in the past, but I don't think they're doing a lot right now.
Yes, we have all of the recommendations and Royal Commission's reports that we need. There was an excellent one just a couple of years ago put out by the United Nations working group of experts on people of African descent who laid out a plan, laid out their own plan for policing reform here, recognizing very explicitly that systemic racism existed in the system. And so, all that is left now is the political leadership. That is the secret sauce, the missing element that has prevented us from making the progress that we should be making. There just doesn't seem to be the political will to do the deep reform that is necessary. And until that is done, until we have new leadership or our existing leadership, chooses a more courageous path, then we, my community and the Indigenous community in particular will continue to pay the price.
So you seem to be suggesting, or are you saying that the commissioner should step down?
Oh, I didn't say that. And, I understand that there are those calls and wherever possible, I spoke with National Chief Bellegarde just a week ago, and I told him wherever possible, I wanted to take my instruction from him. We haven't had a chance to have a conversation about this latest statement of his, but I do know that the RCMP is in need of very, very profound reform. And if its current leadership is not up to the job, then that institution needs new leadership. We need to hear a very explicit, not only commitment, but an implementable plan of action to dismantle systemic racism in those institutions. That is a very big job. It's a long-term job, and it can only be done by someone that truly believes that it is essential. And without that, there's no hope of success. And so that's a question that the leadership of the RCMP has to be asked and has to be able to answer.
Okay, a couple of other questions. What is your policy on Canada's relations with China?
Just the little questions, yeah.
The little question, and it's a touch different from everything else.
30 seconds or less. So in terms of China, what we see is that the policy, and it wasn't just Canada, but the policy that we had in the West of, let's say, engagement and deepening ties with China, with the hopes of liberalizing China, reinforcing and helping to develop a robust respect for international law, fundamental human rights, and civil liberties. That policy has failed. It has not yielded that result. And we woke up one day and realized that China was no more liberalized from the civil liberties perspective, but that we had become so enmeshed with them in terms of global trade that it's kind of the worst of all possible worlds. And so we need to first recognize that, and then we need to ask ourselves, how are we going to disentangle ourselves to the extent necessary so that we can have an independent foreign policy. And where we can begin to look to other trading partners, other states to help build the coalitions that might act as a counterweight towards the worst excesses of China.
Okay, can I ask you, this is the last question, and it kind of, you've touched on it already, so it's tying together the two issues. Potentially, could you ask Annamie Paul about the intersection of climate change and international relations? And I think that sort of ties up our discussion quite well so far.
Yes, well, it comes back to, I guess, that point, which is when we were first launched our policy webpage during the leadership race, the first line that I had, it's still there, I think, is we are all interconnected. And this is the thing that has been really reinforced during this pandemic. We are all interconnected, and the decisions taken half a world away have an impact here and vice versa. And the climate and the climate emergency is one of the areas that you see that at play the most. The decisions that are taken abroad are decisions that we're going to have to live with forever, and vice versa with respect to the climate. And so this is a challenge that we can only face internationally, at the international level. There is no one country that can tackle this on their own. There is no set of policies that Canada can bring in on its own to tackle this if other countries choose not to. And so we have got to work together. Canada has got to, wherever possible, show leadership. I believe that this is one of those these issues that we were born to lead on. And so we have got to take our rightful place as a leader on this issue, build the international coalition, support the efforts of other states, reinforce our multilateral institutions that are working on this issue, and really impress upon our citizens and people in all of our countries how critical this issue is and how little time we have left. But also, Andrew, also importantly, as I said, what a tremendous opportunity the green recovery presents for us, particularly as we exit the worst phases of the pandemic.
Well, thank you very much, Annamie. I really appreciate you covering a lot of issues. We thought this might be too ambitious, but I appreciate your keeping to our time, and I realize that you could have said a lot more on many of the issues. I really appreciate covering those issues, and it's wonderful that you were able to spend this time with us 3 days after your by-election and just a few weeks after being elected leader. So I do wish you the best as leader of this national party, of the Green Party of Canada. As the Pearson Centre, we're always delighted to talk to multilateralists who believe in multilateralism so strongly. And as our full name is the Pearson Centre for Progressive Policy, so your progressive approach to a number of issues is most encouraging. Thank you for being with us. I just want to tell our viewers that the next webinar we have is scheduled for November the 6th. We will be talking about green infrastructure with Sean Strickland from Labour, Mary Van Buren from Business, and Andy Fillmore, who's the Parliamentary Secretary for Infrastructure. So that's on November the 6th. There are about 30 YouTube videos that you can visit. So just go to YouTube and type in Pearson Centre, and you'll be able to see all the videos that we've had so far. And later today, you'll be able to see today's video again if you want to watch it again. And certainly, please feel free to share it. With that, everybody, please take care, be safe. And again, Annamie Paul, thank you so much for joining us today, and all the best to you in your new political career.
Oh, thank you so much, Andrew. It was a pleasure. Hope to come back real soon.
We'll do that again for sure. Thank you.